Welcome back, everyone. Today we're making a lemon pillow, and we're going to be using this pattern to make two different styles. We'll be making a wedge pillow, which is style A, and a slice pillow, which is style B. Both styles are very easy to make, so if you're new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, don't forget to download that PDF pattern, and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you'll need 3/4 to 1 yard for your main fabric, and that depends on what style you're trying to make, either the wedge style A or the slice style B. If you're making style A, which is the wedge, you'll need 3/4 of a yard. If you're making style B, which is a slice, you'll need 1 yard. And when it comes to the actual fabric, you can use anything. A canvas, denim, a twill. You can use upholstery fabrics if you're planning on putting these outside. I'm actually going to be using a few different types of fabric. I'm going to be using upholstery fabric, a medium weight twill, and a felty wool type of material. And there's no really reason why I chose these. I just like the way they all look together. Pretty much any type of fabric will work. Also, when it comes to the color scheme, this doesn't just have to be a lemon pillow. You can also double up and make it into a grapefruit and orange. So when it comes to the fabric, get creative with it and use something that's really going to bring out your project. You'll need one 7 to 9 inch zipper, and I'm going to be using an invisible zipper. You don't have to use this style of zipper. I like to use this because I'm going to blend it into the edge on the wedge. So if you don't have any invisible zippers laying around, a regular zipper will work too. And lastly, you'll need your pattern. The pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. I'll have a link below. It's very easy to use. All you have to do is download it, print it out, tape it together, and you're ready to go. Before you tape your pattern together, the best thing to do is to cut off the top and one of the side edges. This is going to allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. After taping the pattern together, it should look like this. And be sure to check your printer alignment for the best possible results. And this one pattern can be made in two different styles. You got style A, which is the wedge, and style B, which is the slice. Keep that in mind when you're cutting out the paper so you cut out the right panels. Each panel will have it listed as well. And then from here, we're going to cut on the outside of the black line. After cutting out all the pieces, you're going to end up with 5 or more seed panels cut out of your main fabric. And for the seed panel, you can add way more than 5 or less than 5. It's totally up to you. You'll need 8 to 16 wedge panels, and this depends on the style you're making. If you're making style A, you'll need 8. If you're making style B, you'll need 16. You'll need 2 side zipper panels cut out of your main fabric. You only need this panel if you're making style B. You'll need 2 side panels cut out of your main fabric, and this is for style B as well. You'll need 1 bottom side panel cut out of your main fabric, and this is for style A. Remember to cut this one on the fold. And lastly, you'll need 1 to 3 main panels cut out of your main fabric. And if you're going with style A, you'll need 1 main panel. If you're going with style B, you'll need 2 main panels. Moving on to assembly, we're going to start with making style A first, but both style A and B start off with the exact same assembly steps. So you're going to want to start from this point, and we're going to be adding the wedges onto the main panel to start with. So grab your wedge panels, and there's a few different ways you can attach these onto the main panel. I'm going to walk you through a few that I think are the best. First, you want to lay them out and just see if they match up correctly. These do have a 1/4 inch seam allowance on them, so they're not going to line up exactly like they are on the pattern. There's going to be a little bit smaller gap. And essentially that 1/4 inch seam allowance is going to be used as a hem, so you're going to roll that edge over and get a nice clean edge. And that's actually going to be our first technique when it comes to attaching these panels. We're going to roll the edges over and stitch it down. It is very time consuming, but I'm going to show you faster techniques in future steps. Again, if you're making style A, you're going to want 8 of these. If you're making style B, you're going to want 16. And this technique is mainly for if you're using a fabric that's fraying a ton, you're going to roll that edge over, press it, and it's going to get rid of that fray. It's very hard to press this felted fabric, so I'm going to show you a trick to get those edges to stay down. And that trick is simply just using hemming tape. The one I'm using requires heat, so you're going to have to press it on, but you can get this in all different types of styles. And pretty much all you have to do is lay it within that 1/4 inch seam allowance, roll the edge over, and apply the press. And that will turn it into a gooey adhesive and hold that edge down. And simply go all the way around the outside edge. Again, this is very time consuming. Another technique is using fabric glue. It's a little bit easier to manage and you don't need to press it, because the main goal is just to get that edge to roll over so it's easier to add a top stitch. So you don't really need a strong or permanent glue. I actually tried both techniques on this panel. It worked well. If you are using a thicker material, I do recommend snipping the corners just to reduce a little bit of that bulk and get a cleaner round edge. And then go ahead and repeat that for all of your wedge panels. The next technique is going to be a lot quicker, but real quick before I move on, if you did use this technique, I recommend testing each one, placing it in the wedge placement area, and seeing if it lines up, because you want these to be as symmetrical as possible. And the easiest way is just to test each one as you make it. Alright, moving on to the easiest technique, and to do this you're going to have to cut out the seam allowance. We want to get down to the smallest part of this panel. And with this new panel, we're going to use it to cut all of our new pieces. If you already cut the wedge panels, all you have to do is place it back on and trim the seam allowance off. When it comes to this technique, the raw edge will be exposed, so try to pick a fabric that's not going to fray. Unless you want it to fray, because that also adds a look as well. But there you go, it's already done. You don't have to roll the edges over, and you're ready to sew it on. Both of these techniques work great. It really just matters what fabric you're using and what you want it to look like in the end. But anyways, moving on, we're going to grab the main panel, but before we start placing the wedges on, we're actually going to clean up the outside edge by adding a serge. And the reason I'm doing this is because this fabric is completely unraveling and fraying, so this serge is going to hold it all together. If you don't have a serger, you can use a zigzag stitch directly on top of the edge, and that works just as good. But if you're using fabric that doesn't fray, you don't need to do this step. From here, we're going to start placing the wedges on the actual main panel, and feel free to use the pattern as a reference. You can place the wedge on, then place the pattern over top and kind of line it up as you go. Or you can just kind of lay them out and move them around and see what looks best to your eye. It does take a little bit of messing around to get them to look nice. And I do recommend using a lot of pins to keep these secure down as you're sewing. And real quick before we start sewing, you can actually change the size of the wedges. And this will give you a different look. If you cut them smaller, it's going to give you a wider gap. And that's just something to think about if you're trying to obtain a custom look. But anyways, we're going to stitch the outside edge of each wedge. This step does take a while, so just take your time. Try to make it as neat as possible because that stitch is going to be front and center, so any little off stitches will be noticeable. So I recommend using an edge presser foot so you can bump up next to that edge and get a nice clean stitch, and also match your thread color with your fabric color. If you do both of those, you're going to end up with perfect looking stitches. After finishing up, double check, make sure everything is looking good, because at this point it's super easy to de-thread or reposition it before you move on. I will say I didn't line mine up perfectly. A good way to test it is fold it in half and see if everything is lined up. These panels can easily move as you're stitching, so just keep an eye on that as you're sewing. Next, grab all of your seed panels, and this panel is optional. If you don't want to add the seeds on, you can skip ahead. And we're going to be doing the same thing as the previous step, roll that edge over a 1/4 inch. And feel free to use any of the techniques we used in previous steps. The seed panel is smaller and a little bit harder to work with. So an easy way to get the edge to roll over is using a small piece of cardboard, cut it the same size as the inside circumference, place it in the center of your fabric, and roll the edges over the cardboard. I found using a thinner cardboard worked best. It was a lot easier to roll those edges over without it getting in the way. And from here, all you have to do is press it and keep working around that outside edge. Pair this technique with the hem tape and you have an easier way of doing it. And if you are using a thicker fabric, I do recommend adding snips along the curve. It helps reduce a little bit of that bulk and gives you a cleaner looking round edge. Repeat this for all of your seed panels. I decided I only wanted to add 3. Feel free to add 3, 5, or as many as you want. Using the pattern, locate the placement guides, and you can either place them on these placement guides or you can find your own ways to place them. There's really no right way of doing it, it's just whatever looks best to you. I recommend placing them on, moving them around, and just keep moving around until you find that perfect spot. Add a few pins and we're going to stitch on the outside edge just like we did the wedge panels. Stitching these on is a little bit more tricky because they're so small, so just take your time and try to make it as neat as possible. After stitching them all on, double check, make sure all the layers got stitched together and they're looking good. This does complete the main panel, so if you're making style A, you're good to keep moving on, or if you're making style B, you're going to need to make one more of these. We will be moving into style A from here, so if you are making style B, you can skip ahead. For style A, it's nice to have all these lined up so that way when you fold in half, it's symmetrical on both sides. Grab the bottom side panel, remember this panel was cut on the fold. Chalk out the centers on both sides of the pattern, and do the same thing for the main panel. Chalk the centers out on both sides. These points are very important because it's going to help us line everything up and also add the zipper. But actually really quick, if you're choosing not to add a zipper, you just line these points up, wrap it around the outside edge, and stitch it on. But I want the ability to pull the stuffing out, so that's why I'm going to be adding a zipper. And we're going to be using an invisible zipper. I want it to be as hidden as possible, so that way both sides of the pillow can be presentable. If you don't want to use an invisible zipper, a regular zipper works just as good too. Lay the bottom side panel out flat with right sides facing up. Before we sew onto the edge of the bottom side panel, we first want to press out the edges of the zipper. You can skip this, but it does help quite a bit. Grab the bottom side panel, unzip your zipper, and place the right sides together. Try to have that center mark somewhere within that zipper. When it comes to sewing an invisible zipper, I highly recommend looking into an invisible zipper presser foot. This is pretty much the whole reason that zipper is hitting, because it's going to track on top of that zipper and stitch directly next to the zipper. It's just one of those little things that really makes the process easy. Zip the zipper back up. This is going to help us align it onto the main panel. Using our chalked marks, we're going to line the centers up. And we're going to be placing the right side of the zipper to the right side of the main panel. With it lined up, unzip the zipper, place a few pins so it doesn't move around, and stitch it directly on top of the main panel edge. Try to stitch it the same distance as the opposite side of the zipper. Zip the zipper back up and just double check to make sure the center marks are still lined up on the main panel and the bottom side panel. If everything is looking good, we can start to line up the outside edge of that bottom side panel with the main panel. Fold the panel in the center and bring the opposite side to the opposite side of the bottom side panel. When it comes to sewing by the zipper, pull the train in a little bit to the zipper, line up the edges, and you're going to taper it in as you're stitching. Jump over to the opposite side of the zipper and taper it back in and continue your stitch. When it comes to lining up the opposite side of the bottom side panel, again, you're going to want to line up the middle chalked marks. Place a ton of pins around the outside edge. Add a stitch all the way around that outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. It's really easy until you get to those corners. You kind of have to maneuver it and move it up as you're sewing and continue it around that corner. This pattern is designed to have the points at the top that you sew through. It just helps keep everything lined up. It helps to use those side points and those center markings as you're sewing to keep everything lined up. After finishing up the stitch, double check all the edges, make sure all the layers got stitched together. And if you want to, you can snip the points flush with the seam allowance. Also, this raw edge can be cleaned up by using double-sided bias tape, but it's on the inside and I'm not too worried about it. So we're gonna flip the right sides out, do one last once over. I like to check the edges again because sometimes you'll see something on the outside that wasn't on the inside. If everything is looking good, the last thing we have to do is add the stuffing. I'm using a stuffing that's used in outdoor cushions. It's soaked in a solution to help it kind of work with the weather and the wetness, but feel free to use whatever type of stuffing you want. It's all essentially the same. I'm just using these outside, so I wanted to pick something that's going to work a little bit better for outside and tell you about it. Stuff the pillow, zip it closed, and your wedge style is complete. You can also kind of change the width and look by adding more or less stuffing. It's also another way to make it a little bit more soft and comfy. But anyways, that's going to complete style A, which is the wedge pillow. Moving on, this is the start to style B, which is the slice pillow. For this style, you need 2 of the complete main panels with wedges and seed panels sewn on. But for the moment, we can place these off to the side and grab your side zipper panels. We're going to be adding a zipper to the longer edge. We're not going to be sewing it into the curve like we did the wedge. We're also going to be using another invisible zipper. If you don't have an invisible zipper, a regular zipper works just as good. Grab one of your side zipper panels, place the right sides together, lining up that top side edge, and add a stitch. After finishing up the stitch, we're going to close the zipper. Locate your second side zipper panel. Place the right side of the zipper to the right side of the panel. Use the side edges to line up both of the panels. Place a few pins in the zipper. Unzip the zipper and add a stitch along that edge. With the invisible zipper attached, we're going to flip it over to the right side, and as you can see, it kind of closes in and hides that zipper under the fabric. To neaten it up, we're going to add a top stitch to both sides. This not only makes it look nicer, but it also adds another layer of durability. As you can see, it exposed the zipper just a little bit. You can actually move that fabric to totally hide the zipper. It just takes a little bit adjusting to dial it in. Next, we're going to grab the side panel, locate the connect edge. It's going to be the shorter edge. This is going to be where we're going to connect that side zipper panel. So grab your complete side zipper panel assembly, place the right sides together, lining up the outside edge, and add a stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to add a top stitch, so fold the seam allowance so it's pointing in the direction of the side panel and add your stitch. After stitching, we're going to flip it around to the wrong side and trim the zipper end flush with the seam allowance. Grab your second side panel and we're going to attach it on the opposite side of the assembly. But before we do that, we want to move the zipper train to the inside of the side zipper assembly. With the right sides together, stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Fold the seam allowance so it's pointing towards the side panel and add your top stitch. After adding the top stitch, we're going to flip it over to the wrong side and trim the zipper end flush with the seam allowance. Next, we're going to place the right side together, lining up the opposite end of the side panel and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And just like in previous steps, we're going to move the seam allowance to the right or the left and add a top stitch. And that's going to complete the side panel assembly. So if you want to make any adjustments, you're going to want to do that now before we start adding the main panels. Grab your main panels, and what we're going to be doing is sewing that side panel to the outside edge of the main panel. You can place one of the main panels off to the side, grab your side panel assembly, place the right sides together, lining up the outside edge of the side panel and the outside edge of the main panel. Add a couple pins to keep everything secured down, and we're going to stitch the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Take your time and go slow, try to make it as neat as possible. It's always good to keep an eye on any shifting as you're sewing, so that way there's no gap at the end and the panels are perfectly lined up. After finishing up the stitch, we're going to flip the right sides out, double check all of the layers, make sure everything got stitched together and it's nicely and lined up around the outside edge. If everything is looking good, we can slide this panel to the side, grab our second main panel and place the right sides together on the opposite side of the side panel. And you'll want the wedges to line up the same way, so that way it's symmetrical on both sides. Place pins and stitch the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is hard to get your first try, so if you do mess up, no worries, you can de-thread and start again. Double check all the layers. If everything is looking good, we're going to locate the zipper and pull the right sides out. While you have the right sides out, do one more once over, look at the seams, look at the wedges, make sure everything is looking good. And lastly, all we have to do is add the stuffing. If you didn't watch Style A assembly, I'm using an outdoor stuffing. It's just soaked in a solution so it deals with the weather and wetness a little bit better. If you plan on having these outdoors, it's something to look into. Add the stuffing, and something to keep in mind, the more stuffing or less stuffing you add, you can kind of adjust the width of the pillow with that, and overall give it a more full or less full look. It's something to play around with to get that perfect look. And if you don't want to use stuffing, you can also use foam too. You just cut it to the same circumference and put it on the inside. And all you'd have to do is change the width of the side panel to the width of your foam. Same goes for the wedge pillow. And there you have it, your lemon pillow is complete. Hopefully yours turned out awesome. Whether you're making a lemon, a grapefruit, an orange, or just a random fun color abstract pillow. I'd love to see what you come up with, so tag me at Instagram at Properfit Clothing. But until then, I'm gonna keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.